From the opinion pages of the Wall Street Journal, this is Potomac Watch.
Ron DeSantis, the Florida governor, kicked up a political tempest this week by calling the Russian invasion and war on Ukraine merely a, quote, territorial dispute, end quote, and that aiding Ukraine with weapons is not in the U.S. national interest because it risks a clash between NATO and the United States, as well as a nuclear conflict. Why did the governor, as he kind of does a soft launch for his presidential campaign, why did he do this? And was it smart policy and smart politics, or could it be his first big political mistake? Welcome. I'm Paul Gigot with my colleagues Kim Strassel, now back from holiday. Kim, welcome back. And Bill McGurn. Hello to both of you. So a striking move by DeSantis on Ukraine, responding to a questionnaire sent out on Ukraine by a Fox News host. Ron DeSantis took a line that is similar to the one being taken by Donald Trump, although not with quite all of the Trumpian bravado that you could expect. And we know from the former president. Kim, you wrote a column about a month ago or so about previous example of DeSantis making comments that hinted at going in this direction on Ukraine, and you were critical of him. I guess the governor didn't get the memo, but what do you think the calculation here is for him?
Yeah, I guess he doesn't read me. I won't take that too much to heart.
Oh, he reads you. He just didn't agree.
That's okay. Yeah, what he had done a few weeks ago was, and it was a little bit more vague, he had said that we should not be giving a blank check to Ukraine. And it was vague enough that I think you could say that he gave himself some room. I think even these latest comments, he's given himself some room. This time he defined what's going on between Russia and Ukraine as a territorial dispute, suggested that it isn't vital to U.S. interests, suggested we should not be giving Ukraine long-range weapons or fighter jets. And this does sound a lot like Donald Trump. And I think that what's driving the governor here is, I don't agree with the reasoning, but I think he's looking out there. He's worried that public appetite and support for the Ukrainian cause may be waning, especially among the Republican base. Now, I would note it hasn't shifted that much. There's been a poll out that showed that about 40% of Republican voters feel that we're giving too much support. That's a change of about 9% since last year. So I think he's trying to maybe diminish the distance between him and Trump and kind of account for the possibility that this would not be a popular decision. I think there's actually a lot of political peril there that he's not taking into account, but that is arguably what's driving him.
Yeah, that's on the politics. Let's listen to Donald Trump at one of his recent events talk about how he could bring about peace in Ukraine in one day.
Before I even arrive at the Oval Office, I will have the disastrous war between Russia and Ukraine settled. It will be settled quickly. I will get the problem solved, and I will get it solved in rapid order, and it will take me no longer than one day. I know exactly what to say to each of them. I got along very well with them. But I stand here today, and I'm the only candidate who can make this promise. I will prevent, and very easily, World War III, very easily.
Bill, Donald Trump, miracle worker, peacemaker, the Nobel Prize clearly coming his way. But, you know, when he talks about not avoiding World War III and wanting peace, I mean, there's some appeal to that. I mean, nobody wants World War III, and nobody wants a NATO-Russia clash, much less a nuclear one. So, you know, there's always the people who want, let's see if we can get a peace. The question is peace of what kind and peace on what terms? And that's the rub, right? You can promote peace and end up with a peace of surrender or the peace of Ukraine being dismembered, a big chunk of it going over to Russia, kind of rump state left, and the rump state that therefore NATO would be left in a much weaker position to have to support. So it very much depends upon how you define peace. And DeSantis, of course, used the word peace as well, that he desires it. What's interesting to me is that Trump's response to DeSantis's statements on Ukraine to Fox News is that, well, that Ron DeSantis is just doing anything that I do now. You know, he's just imitating me. And I think that illustrates a potential problem for DeSantis in a race against Trump. They're the two most prominent, leading in the polls, Republican candidates so far. But I think the danger for the governor is that while he's trying to run as somebody who has Donald Trump's toughness and outsider credentials without the craziness, he risks becoming Donald Trump light if he merely imitates Trump's positions, particularly on something as significant as what he's going to do about Ukraine. And that could become a judgment by some voters that, well, maybe DeSantis really isn't his own man.
Yeah, let me answer that on two issues, both substance and then politics. On the substance, I mean, there's so many aspects of Russia and Ukraine, but I point to one because the critics of our support for Ukraine frequently point out that China is a real issue. And I would just say, what is the message to China if Putin succeeds in Ukraine? I mean, right now, I think Ukraine is really giving China pause over Taiwan. And of course, China is firmly on Putin's side. So I think you have to ask, will Taiwan be better off, if we got out of Ukraine and stopped supporting them? I don't think so. I think that's a false dichotomy that they set up. On politics, you hint about Donald Trump light, and I think there's a lot to that politics. One of the appeals that we all know about Donald Trump is that he fights. The people think he fights. And when people like that someone fights, they don't want him just to fight and then fold. They like someone who will take the punches and not surrender their position. But the way he came out with his Ukraine policy, whether or not you like or loathe Donald Trump, he says what he thinks and let the chips fall where they may. DeSantis in this statement looked really calculating. It didn't look like it came straight from the heart. It looked like, I've been in the White House. I know what it's like to have 40 people look over a statement and question, every comma and every word. And that's what I think DeSantis looked like. And when against Trump, it kind of looks inauthentic. So I don't know it will have the effect that Trump did. I mean, it's clearly an effort to attract the voters who are attracted to Trump because of it. I'm not sure that it works the same way because it doesn't look authentic. I'm not saying he's lying, but it looks too calculated. And also, when Donald Trump came out with a view, he's all in, right? He'll say, cut off the aid and stuff. So you'll look weak against Trump, too. I don't see the gain for DeSantis at all.
Yeah, obviously, here we are in March of 2023. The election isn't for a year in the primaries, and then in November of 2024, the presidential race, presumably, at least at this stage, President Biden will be the Democratic nominee. We don't know exactly what will happen in the war in Ukraine. It has variables that are simply unpredictable. But I would argue that if you are thinking you're going to be President DeSantis on January 20th, 2025, one thing you don't want is that Putin has rolled over Ukraine and sits now with his forces on the Ukrainian border. He's destabilized Moldova. He now has some more menacing capacity against the Baltic states and NATO. And to your point, Bill, about China, China has looked at the results and says, we get it. America and the West lack the staying power on Ukraine because they have a public that is increasingly looking inward and doesn't want to support that. So we doubt they'll do anything on Taiwan. That's not the world, I think, Kim Strassel, that a President DeSantis would want to inherit.
No, absolutely not. And it's another reason why this is the wrong approach. I mean, you could make the argument that what he's doing here as well, what's motivating this is that sort of this lazy approach that if this is something that Biden is for, then Republicans have to oppose it. And since the president is pretty solid in its support of Ukraine, we're just going to be in the opposite camp. I think that there's actually a way for DeSantis instead to define himself in a way that's both very different from Donald Trump, but also different from Joe Biden. One of the mistakes that I think Biden has continued to do is he always defines this war in terms of these kind of fuzzy international norms. We got to restore international order and we all care about this thing called democracy. When in fact, he is failing to define the U.S. national interest, which is very real here, which is what you were just discussing. We need to make sure that Putin doesn't get a victory. We need to make sure Ukraine wins to keep Putin away from NATO borders. We are doing at a fraction of the cost that it would take us normally in our support with Ukraine. We are seriously degrading Russia's military capacity at the moment. These are all things that are good for the U.S. DeSantis could be out there making that argument. He could be criticizing the president, which I think would be a fair criticism, for not putting out a defined objective here and for not giving Ukraine what it needs to actually wrap this up and win and let it drag on. And these would all be making these points, to your point, would not only be defining in terms of his candidacy and draw some space between himself and Trump and Biden, but would be pushing the administration in a direction that would be helpful to the United States interests and his presidency were he elected.